very good morning to all, and so good to see so many of you here, coaches, practitioners. So, yes, I'm just going to share a little bit more about nonlinear pedagogy and just also what it means for you as a coach and also what it means for the individual athlete. So some of you may be familiar with some of these ideas because I think it has been shared at some point in time on different platforms through NYSI and Sports Singapore as well. So yes, I'm a teacher by training, so I'm currently at NIE. I've always been involved in sports, football especially. I've always also been very interested to know how coaches teach skills, how learners learn skills. That's always been something that I've always been very focused on. So maybe just to kickstart everything, I'm just going to share a short video with you first. Well, you recognize who the parents are, right? Agassi and Steffi Graf, isn't it? So perhaps genetics play a role in helping a young kid, play such a great game against the guy. But as coaches, while we recognize genetics possibly, but as coaches, we have a huge role to play in terms of how we nurture the young athletes. There's a lot of control in terms of the kind of practices that we have for them, the kind of instructions, the kind of feedback too. So therefore, coaches play a critical role. And what will be some of these effective principles of coaching? Right? In view of time constraint, I will not ask you to go to menti.com, but maybe on your own, just for a couple of seconds, think about what would be some of these effective principles of coaching. What would be important for you as a coach in guiding you to make sure that your practices are sound, feedback is quality feedback, great instructions? So probably some of you may have some of these ideas in your head, right? It has to be obviously perhaps athlete-centered. So the focus should always be on the child, on the athlete. You may want to think about, hey, can I allow the athlete to be exploratory in terms of how they acquire movement, skills, coordination? How do they learn those movement skills? Exploratory, allowing them to explore. Would you also want to have quite a bit of variability in your practice because then they do different things? Not just that, the different things that they do would be actually quite representative of how they would perform the skill in a game. Do you want them to dribble the ball just around a couple of stationary cones, or actually in a 1v1 situation, in a small-sided game situation where there's lots of variability there? Do you see your role more as a facilitator? So you're kind of setting up the different tasks, constraints, the practices, manipulating the rules, facilitating the athlete in terms of how they explore that learning, rather than very prescriptive. And importantly, do you also then focus on the athlete acquiring their own individualized movement solutions? The way they perform a skill could be very different from other of their peers, or maybe different from what you term as an expected good movement outcome or movement behavior. So these few principles of coaching are actually increasingly seen as very critical in supporting or underpinning effective coaching. The athlete-centeredness, room for exploration, lots of variability in the practice, your role as a facilitator, and really focusing on the individual perhaps having their own individualized ways of moving. So, why do we perhaps think that those principles of coaching could be effective? Because we all know, and as coaches, and these examples that I share with you, or what I'm sharing with you today, do make reference to your own sports as well. And you know, coaching is not really just a science, it is an art too. Because there's so many dynamic components that are present or inherent in your practices in the coaching setting as well. So in fact, we see the way learners or athletes behave like what we call a complex system. Now what do I mean by that? I'll just kind of break it down very easily for you. So for example, you may practice for a long time and you will see maybe very little improvement. But sometimes when athletes practice for a short while and you see a sudden jump, sudden improvement in performance. It could be because of certain instructions that you've given, or maybe certain equipment that you have also put in place in the practices. That they suddenly realize something and there's a huge non-linear change in performance. So it could be non-proportional, and you probably will realize that in your own coaching session. Not just that, there are possibly many or multiple ways of achieving a goal. In football, for example, to score a goal, you get the ball into the net. But you could do it with different parts of your body within the rules of the game. It doesn't have to follow a single way or a single style of doing it. If I want to pick up a bottle of water, I can do it this way, I can do it this way, I can do it different ways. So there are different ways of actually achieving an outcome within the rules of the game. And not just that, your athletes can and will respond to changing variables or changing rules, changing equipment. They are able to do that. So when you scale different task constraints, such as, for example, the length of a racket, using shorter racket or longer size or bigger racket, you will see the way that they hold the racket will be different, the way that they hit the ball will also be different. You can also scale the playing area from a small area to a bigger area to a much bigger area. Let's say in a 3 versus 3 possession game in basketball, for example, or netball. The change in size of the playing area results in different behaviors on the part of your athletes. So in the game of football, bigger area, they may take the ball and dribble, or there's greater area for them to pass the ball. Their teammates will move into space to receive the ball a lot easier as well. So by scaling these different variables, your learners can actually respond to these variables and they will show different behaviors too. Noise. So noise refers to like variability in practice. Noise in practices, typically they are seen as something that's undesirable. That, okay, we don't want noise. We want our athletes to always repeat the same movement in exactly the same way. Right? That's typically what coaches would prefer. But noise, when you put variability in practice, be it whether you change the size of the racket, the size of the balls, the playing area, this kind of variability in practice actually allows the learner to move from one behavior to a new, different behavior. That noise or that variability actually allows exploratory behavior, actually allows the learner to move from one stable pattern of behavior to a new preferred stable pattern of behavior. And that's where learning occurs. So noise is not necessarily seen as something that is bad. Noise in your practices actually could be the key processes where learning occurs. And that's where they do the exploration and learning. So in fact, we see these behaviors when we deal with learners, athletes, they demonstrate these behaviors. And these are signature traits of what we call complex systems. And these are signature traits where then we can see that learners do behave like complex systems. Those behaviors that come about are a result of many of these different interactions between themselves, the equipment that they use, the rules, the game, the task itself. So let's have a look at this slide here. This is the top-down view. Okay. These little white things here are actually birds. This is the edge of the cliff, and this is the ocean here. So this is top-down view. Each of this white thing here is one individual bird. Do you realize that there is a really strange way they've arranged themselves here? Kind of equidistance, right? So who decides on, hey, you got to stand here, and hey, you got to stand there? Is it this bird? Or is this bird? Yeah. No single bird actually controls or makes a decision that say, hey, you got to stay here, you got to stay there. In fact, these species of bird are actually very aggressive towards each other, typically. But during this time of the year when they are trying to hatch their eggs and protect their young, that is when they actually follow very simple rules. They say, hey, look, I need to be near some of my peers so that there is numbers, and in terms of numbers, it's protection against predators. But yet, I don't want to be so close to them. So what happens in the end? You see a very strange pattern here. And it is self-adjusted or self-organized. No single bird decides on where you stand or where you go. So they follow very simple rules, and based on these very simple rules that the birds are trying to follow, very clear, specific patterns of behavior emerges on their own, without you having to tell them exactly what to do. Just like when you see an eagle trying to swoop down and attack another bird, and that's why you see flocks of birds fly together in quite strange formations, trying to move away from the predators. Just like school of fish in the oceans as well, trying to move away like a predator, like a shark, for example. No single bird or fish decides on what kind of pattern to demonstrate. So they follow quite simple constraints. So in fact, constraints are something that, a concept which I'll share with you, which again, it's probably not rocket science, and some of you in your own coaching experiences would have dealt with some of these ideas too. So constraints are influential factors within practice environment, or they are influential factors on acquiring movement coordination. Now what do I mean by that? So you have certain task constraints or certain constraints in your practices, and they kind of set the boundary towards what is possible for your athletes. Right? When you change the size or the length of a racket, you can serve in certain ways. Okay? When you change the size of the ball, you can throw the ball in certain ways. Small ball, you can use one hand to throw. But when it's a bigger ball, you may not be able to grasp the ball with a single hand. You could use both hands to do your passes. So when you change those rules and you change the equipment, for example, certain behavior emerges more strongly than others. So that sets the boundaries in terms of what the athlete can do or what is available to the athlete. But importantly, constraints do not specifically or directly cause behavior. You set the boundaries. So within these boundaries, there are all these movement solutions that are possible. And the athlete can choose those movement solutions within the set of boundaries available to them. Right. And coordination emerges because of those different constraints. And I'll share with you as an example here. And I do share quite a bit of this with some of my students and athletes as well, and coaches too. Let's say in a game of badminton, alright, on the most left, that is the typical size of badminton called 1 versus 1 singles game. You can play many different kinds of strokes, right? The drop shot, the smash, the drive, the clear. But if you really want to accentuate the long and short play in badminton, you can easily just narrow the playing area. You can see the court in the middle, and you keep the length. So the only way for them to win a point within the laws of the game is to try to hit the shuttle right to the back or hit the shuttle to the front. So without you having to tell them exactly what you expect from them, the athletes and the player, they will know, hey, in order for me to win a point, I must hit it either far behind or I try to hit it to the front. So the long and short play actually becomes available. The rest of the strokes are not available to the player. So the long and short play, the overhead clear and the drop shot becomes available because you set the constraints, and therefore those strokes are captured within what is available for the player. So what if you say, hey, look, I want them to just practice on the net play. You shorten the playing area and you keep the width. So like the diagram on the right there. So can they do the overhead clear? They can't. Can they do the smash? Unlikely, because of the dimension of the playing area. So naturally they go on and do the drop shot and the net play. Quite on their own, without the coach having to specifically tell them, hey, I want you to do a net play. Because of the way you have set up the playing area, they will automatically go and play the net play because those are the options now that are available to them. Not the clear, not the smash anymore. So you can imagine, right, how as a coach you have actually a lot of power and control over how you decide on the task constraints available, the kind of rules that you set in, where then you shape different behaviors of your athletes. So we can potentially move in many different ways. Your players or athletes can move in many different ways, but if you set certain boundaries, you only then allow perhaps certain behaviors that are more prominent or more obvious for your athletes or your players to work with. Again, relating to what you want out of your practice session. What is the focus of a practice session? So there are three big constraints groups that I will share with you: performer, environment, and the task. And I spoke a lot about the task constraints earlier on. But clearly you understand here that, hey, in any practice setting, these three groups of categories of constraints are inherently present. The performer would be your athlete, right? How old are they? Do they have the strength and the flexibility to do what you want them to do? Okay? Environment. What is the environment like? Playing football on a natural grass pitch and an artificial pitch is also quite different. Playing floorball in a hall and in a parking area, it's also very different. So the environment plays a huge role too. The task itself is one that I'll highlight quite a bit as well later on also, because the coach, practitioner, has a lot of control over task constraints. So task constraints deals with, for example, the rules of the game. What is the goal of your practice session? Okay? And perhaps the equipment that you could use. And you have a lot of control over that. So the example, the badminton example I've given you, is an example of how you manipulated the dimension of the playing area. And you then, because of the interaction of the performer, the environment, and the task, you see those behaviors emerging on their own. Without you having to tell them, hey, I want you to do this. The long and short play, the net play, you don't have to exactly specifically tell them that. By manipulating the constraints here, you see certain behaviors emerging, goal-directed behaviors emerging. This is one of my favorite clips, and I've shown some of you this previously, but again, just to highlight what we mean by goal-directed behavior emerging because of an interaction between the performer, the environment, and the task. Quite clearly, right, because of his practice environment, he has developed a very unique golf swing that worked for him. Because of the lack of space at home at the balcony, he's very little follow through, alright, with a little wing, short swing, and you get his hit. And that came about because of the interaction between him, the environment itself, and the task of the golf swing too. So you could see those behaviors came about because of that interaction. And just like if you just think a little bit about your own sports and your own coaching sessions, you would know, hey, sometimes whatever my athletes, the skills or the movement that they demonstrate is really a consequence of all that interaction. So you need to be quite sensitized to, hey, what am I dealing with here? The performer itself, what he or she is supposed to do, what kind of rules am I setting, what kind of equipment am I using, the environment too. So I work quite closely with some of my collaborators at international settings, and one of a good collaborator, Max O'Sullivan, so he works with the Swedish FA, and he also works with a Swedish professional club with young players. Okay. And he wrote something in the Swedish media. So he says here, the purpose of training functional movement adaptable to a challenge in the game, instead of expecting that everyone should copy a perfect action, coaches often assume that optimal motor action automatically leads to a good performance. But that's a false conclusion. So what do I mean by that? What does he mean by that? Sometimes coaches think that, hey, when I see a good movement, it should then automatically lead to some perfect or good, excellent outcome. But the form itself may not necessarily lead to an outcome that is desirable. Not necessarily. Someone can show you the best form, but it doesn't quite lead to the best outcome. And sometimes practitioners may be very fixated with the idea that, hey, I need everyone to show me the same optimal, perfect, expected movement form. Because if they can use and show me that perfect movement form, then I think it should lead to some very good performance outcome. But that, in some sense, is a fallacy. There is an overemphasis on that movement, optimal movement pattern that is desirable for every single one. The key thing is this: every single one of athletes would have their own individualized optimal movement pattern, but not an optimal movement pattern that is expected of every single one, the same movement pattern. That is the key point here. Because they are all different, they interact differently with the task and the environment at their own way. So therefore, each of them can score a goal, can hit a good shot, perhaps in slightly different ways, pegged to their own performer constraints. Not in an optimal movement pattern that you would expect for every single one to follow. Because what Ronaldo can do, what Messi can do, for example, is pegged to what that individual is capable of in terms of the movement possibilities and the makeup of that person's anatomical character. Some, the expert players, will have the flexibility and the strength to do what they show, but your young little kids may not have that, and therefore that optimal movement pattern is not to be expected from your kids. But they have their own way of doing it. Just like this, right? Michael Johnson, 200 meters, 400 meters, world champion. But the way he runs, very unorthodox, but yet he is the world champion and record holder for the longest time. So it worked for him. Just like in high jump, what is the task goal? To clear the bar as high as possible. So you could do it different ways, right? So before the mid-60s, this was probably a way that many of the high jumpers were comfortable with. Then came someone with the name of Dick Fosbury, and he revolutionized high jump. He did the Fosbury flop. So there are different ways of clearing the bar. Within the rules of the game, you could do that. Hey, it's fine. So perhaps an optimal movement pattern again that cuts or is expected of every single one person really could be a fallacy. Let's take a look at this clip. Notice that boy has no arms. So that boy actually has no arms, but yet he could make his 3-point shots as accurate as possible. Okay, I'm not sure if you actually caught that, but he actually had no arms, just perhaps upper limb. But he found his own shooting movement pattern that worked for him. Without the arms, without the flick of the wrist, which many of us would possibly say, hey, look, I need to see that flick of the wrist, the ball rolling off your fingertips. That would not be possible for him because he doesn't have the arms to do that, or the hands to do that. But yet he has found his own way of doing it. Very clear example of the individualized movement solution. A lot more flexion extension on the lower limbs to project the ball. Freezing his joints, shoulders to propel the ball as well. So he's found his own way, just like the example of the Japanese golfer earlier on. That goal-directed behavior emerged because of the interaction between the learner, performer, the environment, and the task. Okay? So other tasks, other roles, other constraints that we as coaches have a lot of control over would actually be the kind of instructions that we give our athletes. Verbal instructions. So what kind of verbal instructions could work? So we've done some studies with the schools, and I'm just going to show you these 2 clips where the same teacher two different classes use different verbal instructions to teach throwing and catching at the primary school level. Okay, so listen to the information and the instructions in the video.
Number one, you need to go underhand first. Swing. Number two, opposite leg step forward and then throw and point. How about overhead? Overhead you must face. Yes, okay. When you change the overhead throw, you got to face your partner sideways. So let's say my partner is there, I face sideways. Beam back to your ear. Elbows up. Okay, point to your partner, throw. When you throw, same thing. You need to point to where your partner is so that the beanbag can go straight there. Catching, if the beanbag is above you, thumbs together, fingers to the sky. Okay?
Are you familiar with this kind of instructions? Throwing, catching, you're probably very familiar, right? So very movement form oriented. What you're supposed to do in terms of how you stand, where you point to, how you receive. Let's watch the second video. Same teacher, different class.
Overhead throw, right? I want you to imagine your hand is like a whip, alright? Underarm throw, alright? You swing your arms like a pendulum clock like that. When you throw, make sure that the item gets over the net, alright? When you catch your beanbag or when you catch the shuttlecock, how do you catch? Imagine your hands like a net or like a cushion when you catch.
Do you see the difference between the two clips in terms of the instructions? Teaching the same skill of throwing and catching. The first one, very movement form oriented. The second one, call out an analogy, but also very movement outcome oriented. Not specifically to how you should stand to throw, how you should stand to catch, but giving the kids some idea of an analogy of what it would look like, but not prescribing in terms of the movement form and the coordination on specifically what you need to do for catching and throwing. Just to give them an idea. So you can imagine that the second clip that's shown there provides that room for exploration, provides that room and buffer for the kids to explore and find their own ways of throwing and catching. Okay? So there are actually studies that are done in this area looking at the role of such instructions. So the first one, where it's very movement form oriented, is very internal focus. The second one, where it's a bit more outcome oriented, is actually movement external focus, focusing on the movement outcome and the movement effect. Okay. So these are examples again, if I just use the game of football and kicking. So something that is very internal would be movement form oriented, right? Where should I have my planting foot? How should I swing my kicking leg? Transfer of weight, bending my knees, for example. Whereas movement outcome oriented or external focus would really... Now, trajectory of the ball. How should the ball fly? Okay? Accurate target. Make sure the ball gets to where you want it to go. Accuracy. So for example, again, in terms of passing, typical cues in soccer as well as football: plant your foot beside the ball, contact point here in the inside of your foot, lock your ankle, preparatory swing, contact the ball, point to where you want the ball to go to. That's very internal focus, movement form oriented. But you could also use very simple cues, like for example, in a pass, ball on the ground, make sure your friend can receive the pass comfortably and it's accurate to the feet. None prescribing the movement form for the player, right? But yet, very movement outcome oriented, because you could do it in different ways. You could do it on the outside, you can do it with your non-dominant foot, you could do it on the inside foot as well, but I don't prescribe a specific movement form for you. It allows exploration, because in a game setting, ball comes to you, tight time constraint, you will do different things too. Key thing is, ball on the ground, accurate, comfortable for my teammate to receive. Right? So I mentioned about movement variability earlier on, how we see variability has a functional role to play in practices, because they try different things, they explore, and it is during that exploratory process that they actually learn, because they know what works for them and what may not work for them. Why is it that it works for them too? It is during that variability in the practice sessions that they really can learn a lot more as well. So I'm going to share with you a short clip, again it's produced by one of the collaborators, just to highlight to you the role of variability. And I want to highlight this term, or this statement. It says, repetition without repetition. Sounds strange. Repetition without repetition. What does it mean?
Another very important practice design concept is repetition without repetition. In 1967, one of the big hitters in the motor learning world, Soviet national Nikolai Bernstein, published a book called The Coordination and Regulation of Movements. In his book, he discussed some very key understandings, including repetition without repetition. What he theorized was that in order to become more skilled, training does not consist in repeating a solution to a motor problem time after time, but in the process of solving this problem again and again. Basically, we want our players to have to continually solve problems just as they do in a performance environment. If we look at it from an ecological perspective, what repetition without repetition allows for is the continual process of becoming attuned to affordances within a similar environment. Let's have a look at repetition without repetition taking place in a training situation. In this activity, there is a simple setup. A 10 metre by 10 metre square with 4 gates placed in the middle of each side. There is an attacking player who starts inside the square and receives a pass from the server. There is a defender who comes in from the outside to tackle the attacker, and there are 2 defenders on the outside who are not allowed inside the square, but it's their job to block the gates. The defenders blocking the gates act as players who are defending space or possibly blocking passing lanes in the performance environment. The player who comes in is the defender, and the attacker is trying to get away from the defender into space. What we have here is an activity that does not have the same solution, and there is no instruction given by the coach in terms of solving it. Repetition without repetition occurs because this training activity does not consist of repeating the same solution, rather repeating a problem that continually needs to be solved differently. Repetition without repetition is a key concept that should guide practice design. The key questions being, does this activity, 1, repeat the same problem within the same environment, and 2, allow the players to continually search for movement solutions? Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you again soon.
Interesting concept, isn't it? So what you're trying to do is to repeat the problem for your athletes, but you don't want them to repeat the solution because there could be slightly different ways of doing it. If you watch the clip earlier on in the 1v1 game, you will notice that the boys who are having the ball, they didn't quite always use the same solution because it's always changing in the practice environment. How close the defender is, where the goals are, where those 2 other defenders are. And you will notice the way they move quite different. Sometimes they do the outside turn, sometimes they do inside turn, sometimes they do the drag back, always searching for space, ball close to them too. So what they're trying to do there is where the coaches provide this environment where there's a lot of variability in the practice, and the players had to then deal with this variability and become more attuned to the environment, where the space is. How does the ball interact with me in terms of control? How can I move the ball away from my defender? Where do I see other players in the game as well? So you are not repeating the solution, you are repeating the problem, but the players and the athletes can explore and look for different ways of achieving the same outcome or trying to get the ball away and into the goal. So just to share with you some of the work that's been done against our collaborator over at AIS in Australia a couple of years back. They worked with the water polo team, the women's water polo team prior to the Beijing Olympics. They got on board, they worked with the coaches there and say, look, let's have some of your practices even more representative. That means also that, hey, how would I make sure that your practices are as real as possible to the real game? How can I add variability into your practices? Okay. So what did they do? They did a lot of work where you could see this picture here. They used quite a lot of different equipment. For example, they had a lot of variability in their practices where they would tie a tube to the person who's taking a shot, and at the moment before the player is about to take a shot, someone will pull, mimicking how it could be like in the actual game where someone is pushing you or pulling you. So coming up, take a shot, get pulled, release, and still try to make the shot as well. So lots of variability in there. They use different size balls too. Alright? Adding that variability. So to sensitize the athletes to become more attuned to all these different variations They even use big Swiss balls to block and occlude the person from taking a shot so that the person needs to make adjustment as well. Or just prior to the point in time when it's supposed to take a shot, the coach will shout out left or right so that they make adjustments and attempt to take the shot to the left or to the right. So lots of variability in that practice. And they encourage them to really explore all these instabilities in the game itself, in the practices. And the players responded actually quite positively to it. How do I make those adjustments in that very dynamic situation? And they actually did quite well in the Beijing Olympics. The Australian water polo team were actually one of the powerhouses there. They got a bronze in that in Beijing. So that was a very clear example of how actually practitioners work with sports scientists to infuse some of these ideas in their practices, to make it relevant. So what are some of the implications for sports coaching? Okay. Again, you could see even earlier on from Rick's presentation as his first keynote, where it moved really away from being coach-centered over the years to being more athlete-centered. Right, where the athletes, again, are the key ingredients in generating and making the practices meaningful as well. So moving away from being coach-centered to athlete-centered, really encouraging problem solving, giving the athletes a bit more autonomy in how they look at solve the problem, but in different ways, and coaches becoming more like facilitators, rather than prescribing specific movement solutions for them. As I mentioned to you, we do then see really the athletes and the players really behaving like what we call complex systems. How they move from one preferred movement pattern to a new preferred pattern, and when they move from one preferred to a new preferred pattern, we see a lot of variability there, because that's where they actually explore, and that's where learning actually occurs. So if we do see learners behaving like complex systems, perhaps then maybe we should consider some pedagogical approaches to account for this kind of behaviors, right? So if they're going to behave like this, we know in the actual world, then how can we coach in ways to account for this non-linearity, for this kind of behaviors? So I'm going to show you a short clip that gives you a very brief overview of what non-linear pedagogy is, a couple of minutes only. Okay?
Do you find yourself constantly teaching the same old one-size-fits-all drills? Why not try nonlinear pedagogy? Nonlinear pedagogy, or NP for short, is a teaching approach that could help students learn sport skills better. It involves three key principles. The first involves incorporating variability in practice. The second is to create representative learning designs. And the third is about simplifying tasks. Sounds like too much to handle. Let's break it down for you. When we talk about incorporating variability in practice, this simply means setting different limits for your students by playing around with different factors. This could be as simple as throwing around different sized balls, for example, to challenge your students to find different ways of catching balls. Students can thus find their own ways to achieve the task outcome. Next, creating representative learning designs means that you are guiding your students to play and learn in different and realistic game scenarios. For example, instead of letting them practice with stationary codes, you could pit them against opponents or get them to compete in small-sided games. Lastly, simplifying tasks would allow students to focus better on the movement outcome. Again, this could mean something as simple as swapping a small ball for a bigger ball that's easier to hit. Students can thus focus on the ball's trajectory instead of struggling to get the correct form of movement. In contrast to one-size-fits-all technique-dominated approaches, NP provides more opportunities for students to collaborate, explore, and come up with their own ways to move. It also caters for learning differences between students and highlights that there are many ways of achieving the same outcome. So how do you get started? You can follow these steps. Firstly, you could roughly demonstrate the movement instead of telling them exactly how to do it. You should also give your students the time and space to try out the different movements. When necessary, use questions to guide them to focus on the task goal instead of telling them exactly how to do it. Lastly, encourage your students to learn by working together. If you'd like to know more about nonlinear pedagogy, visit the Knowledge Bank website.
So very quickly, I think that gives you a very brief overview of what nonlinear pedagogy is. And as mentioned, typically we tend to be very movement form oriented, repetition of drills, making sure that they are able to demonstrate the same movement form over and over again because we want to see consistency. But when it comes to actual transfer of learning and how they use that skill in an actual game setting, that seems to be lacking. That is the challenge. Whereas we are focusing a lot more on the individual movement solutions, as mentioned earlier on, making sure that it's representative, meaning, hey, how would you do the skill in the actual game setting? And we know those behaviors will emerge because of the interaction between the task, environment, and the performer. And I've given you quite a lot of examples already on that. So I'm going to share with you some of these design principles on what nonlinear pedagogy is. Again, the first point will be representativeness. You could see the earlier clip where you saw the 1v1 game, the boys in the football game. That is very representative. You have a defender, you have a goal, you have space that you work with. And they could use and practice their skills of turning the ball control, moving the ball, dribbling, all that, or shooting the ball very clearly in that game setting. Okay? So representativeness is important because then the perceptual information that they can use from the task and the environment from the game is very real to the kind of information that they would use or see or have in a game setting. Perceptual information will then guide their movement. So practicing with cones, yes, you'll be good in terms of your dribbling, but in terms of the actual perceptual information that's available, that kind of practice is devoid of what is actually going to happen in a real game setting. So watch short clip. You may find this person familiar.
What about little children though? Is it can you play too much competitive football, organised football when you're 7 or 8 years old? Could you fall out of love with football?
No, in that age, what they have today is just play.
Yeah.
And play as much as possible. In the street, I don't know if it's possible. In our period, it was today, I don't know. And play and play and play.
Yeah.
And that's all. And make mistakes. And play day after night.
Yeah.
That's what I have to do. And let them. And some advice about behavior, some advice about, okay, we're going to play in that way to understand the game, of course. As much as quick as possible, try to tactics, to understand the game, why we decide to do that or not in the other way. That is...
So you could see his emphasis, Pep Guardiola, right? Man City coach now, previously with Bayern Munich, and of course previously with Barcelona. It's all about playing the game. Because when you play the game, you become attuned to the task and the environment and what is important inside the dynamics in the game itself. And a lot of the very good players really started off playing street football. Right? That's where they get attuned to all this information which guides their action. So when I was much younger, I see a lot of us playing football at HDB void decks. These days you hardly see any kids playing at HDB void decks. I know even though it's not allowed to. Yeah, it's forbidden, yes, that's why. But even at our age when it was forbidden, we were still playing. Alright? You see, so it's a huge difference. And many players, I would think local players, and I can see a group of local players there, we are very good with ball control skills because we move around the pillars in the void decks. But we are not very good at shooting because there's no space for us to shoot. So you could see Pep Guardiola, he says, right, football is the most difficult game in the world because it is open, every situation is completely different, and you have to make decisions minute by minute because everything is changing at all time. So again, that's why practices needs to be as representative as possible. Okay. Constraint manipulation, I think I've touched on this quite a lot already. Again, coaches have a lot of power over this. You can manipulate the goals, the rules, the equipment. It is really just limited by your own creativity. And of course, coaches need to know your game very well so that you know what kind of constraints to manipulate. Are you then encouraging them towards certain areas of discovery or actually pushing them totally somewhere far off? So you must know your game very well. Task simplification, kind of covered that a little bit. It deals with really simplifying the task, making sure that the perception and the action relationship is still tight. For example, we practice in tennis serve, we practice the toss and then we practice the swing. If we do it separately, but when in fact the tennis serve requires the toss and the swing to come together at the same time. Right? So we need to keep that coupling and the relationship tight. But we break it up so much, what we call task decomposition. When we decompose the task so much, when you want to put the task back together, it becomes not realistic. So think about when you are asking your athletes to practice movements, remember to try to keep that perception and the action relationship tight, so you don't decompose it so much, but yet at the same time whether you could simplify the task. So in the serving task, a way of simplifying it could be using shorter racket, or really just tossing the ball and just using your arms to just connect or contact the ball. Because that is simplifying it, but you are keeping the temporal, timing, spatial, accuracy, relationship tight there still. Okay? So always think about whether you could simplify the task. Attentional focus will be what I shared earlier on in terms of the verbal instructions, whether it's more movement form oriented or movement outcome oriented, whether it's internal or whether it's external. And there is a tendency, there's quite a lot of research done in this area where if you focus so much on your internal, on your movement form, it leads to very conscious control of the movement. So much so that you are so conscious about how I should move my arm that you lose sight of really what is the task goal. And conscious control, as many of us would know, leads to very awkward movement because you are paying so much attention to the conscious manipulation of that movement itself. So that's why when you see, maybe in some sports setting where people could be more unsportsmanlike, they will do a bit of trash talking and say, hey look, swing your arm a little bit harder. Hey, move your legs a little bit better. They are trying to get you to consciously think about your movement, when for expert athletes, it is all quite automatic. You don't actually think about your movement at all. So functional variability, which I actually mentioned about the role of variability in encouraging exploration. I think I've shared quite a lot about that. And these are some ideas that you could use, and you may already be using some of these ideas in the way you set up your practices. They're infusing some of these ideas because we know our learners do learn in certain ways. As I mentioned earlier on, the features of their nonlinear behaviors. Now, the next 10 minutes or so, I'm just going to very quickly run through some of the work that we've been doing with schools. So we've got funding from the ministry to actually do some of this work on nonlinear pedagogy. And there's these two phases of work that we've done, but I'm just going to focus on this one, phase one, where we looked at having gone to a school, worked with the teachers, and the teachers taught students in the schools a nonlinear condition, and the same school where they taught what we call a linear condition. So linear condition is really very movement form oriented, repetitive drills, making sure that there's consistency in your movement. Okay, so that's what we did. So we went to 2 schools, secondary 2 level, worked with 8 classes, 4 teachers. Alright, and as I mentioned to you, nonlinear and linear conditions. So the teachers have to teach nonlinear and linear conditions to Sec 2 boys and girls. And they have to be involved in this schedule of interventions. So the task itself is for them to play a 4 versus 4 game. Alright, they play a 4 versus 4 game. In order to score a point, they just have to receive a pass from their teammate after the end line. Alright, and I'll show you a short video later on. And they had 10 weeks of intervention, so they were taught 10 weeks of nonlinear. Okay, one class did that, another class 10 weeks of linear. So they had a post test, okay, which is same 4v4, and a retention test is basically when they did the test again after 1 week of no practice. Okay, and a transfer test where they basically play the same game but in a bigger area. Transfer test 2, which I'll not talk about for this session here, but it's really trying to see how would that transfer to a floorball game. So this is really what happens in a 4 versus 4 game. So the top screen and the bottom screen are actually capturing the same game, but from different angles. So the 4 versus 4 game, very representative, passing, moving, dribbling, receiving the ball after the end line. So we actually captured the whole intervention and the test sessions via video. We also put the kids on with GPS system to determine the position of these kids as they play in a 4v4 game. Right? So what are the variables? Okay, very simple ones to begin with, just number of passes that the teams made, number of consecutive passes, number of types of passes, whether it was an inside, a lob chip, a cross, possession time per team as well, number of goals. So these are very simple discrete measures that we could capture. As I mentioned to you, we also use GPS to determine the position positional data. We had some questionnaires. We also interviewed the kids and the teachers. So, just going to share with you. This is a slide looking at a linear pedagogy condition. I know it's very busy, but I'm going to highlight to you an example of a linear condition class here. So you can see the cues here are very movement form oriented, right? It says flex your ankle, bend your kicking leg, use the inside of the shoe to contact ball, non-kicking foot beside the ball. Again, very movement form oriented. Lots of repetition. If you look at the setup here, pass from one cone to another cone to another cone. Do your passes diagonal as well, which is probably very common, and we do see it, perhaps something that we're very familiar with. In a non-linear setting, if you look at the cues here, as I mentioned earlier on, ball on the ground, easy to control, accurate. That's all. We never prescribe specifically what the movement form should be. Okay? And you could see the activity itself, 3v1 game, representative. We don't have to just pass the ball to a cone. Very little repetition. We repeat the problem, but we don't repeat the solution. It's where repetition with repetition is. Because in a 3v1 game, keeping possession, things are happening all the time. People are moving all the time. The angles for the passes are always also different all the time. Okay, so very quick look at this clip here.
Which part of the leg are you supposed to kick with? Yes, go back, bring ball back to him.
So you could see that is an example of just, as I mentioned to you, passing the ball to one cone to another cone, not a repetition here. This looks a bit messy here. 3v1 situation.
Okay, you go in. What's wrong with that? Accuracy, okay, now you go inside. Take turns. Okay, let's go. Play. Good. Well done. Good passing.
So you could see 3v1 situation, it's always different. Moving here, left, right. Okay, the cues are there, on the ground, accurate, comfortable for your teammates. So lots of variability in there. Repetition or repetition. So I'm just going to very quickly get through some of those variables with you. I don't want to be too technical, but those were the variables, as I mentioned to you, that we were looking at. Successful passes, consecutive passes, types of passes, possession time, goal score. Okay, I'm not going to go through too much with you, but just to highlight some of the key findings, this is for number of successful passes. We actually only see a difference between a pre-test and a post-test, okay, for the non-linear pedagogy condition. We do not see a change in the linear pedagogy condition for number of successful passes. Mean number of consecutive passes, we also do not see a change in your linear pedagogy condition, but we do see a change in your non-linear pedagogy condition between pre and post-test. Number of types of passes, we also see more or greater increase in the number of types of passes by post-test for the non-linear pedagogy condition. Now this is something that's interesting because it means that the players who were taught the non-linear pedagogy could use more different types of passes, not just a specific way of passing too. So a lot of variability in the way they play the game too. Okay? Again, we see the same for mean possession time, greater mean possession time for the non-linear pedagogy group as compared to the linear pedagogy group. Number of goals scored from pre to post, we do not see a difference between both goals. However, only a linear pedagogy condition showed an increase in the goals scored at retention tests. So, but all in all, we could see for these variables, those written in NP, it means that worked better for NP. If it's LP, it means it worked better for LP. But all you could see that on the whole, that non-linear pedagogy seems to work better for this kind of performance outcomes. Gameplay behaviors, so we looked at positional data as well. So we look at the length of play, do they cover that length, direction of play? Do we actually see greater surface area covered by the team? That means perhaps the spread of the play. Right? Do we see maybe more turnovers? So in terms of length of play, that means the direction of play, again we see that the nonlinear pedagogy condition had greater improvement in terms of the distance covered by retention tests. The linear pedagogy also improved, but only we see at the post-test. So in the motor control and motor learning literature, we are actually more concerned with retention tests, because retention test is where you actually retain the learning. So it seems that the nonlinear groups again have a bit more distance covered in the area. Surface area covered, we actually also see that the nonlinear condition had greater cover of area. So again, it's greater spread of play. Maybe they use the space a bit better because they're using that space a lot more. Turnover count, we actually see some turnover count as well. It means losing possession or gaining possession. We see that greater turnover in the non-linear pedagogy condition, which perhaps could tell us that there is greater variability in that game dynamics. It's always changing, losing, winning. There's a lot of dynamism in that game itself. So on the whole, in terms of gameplay behaviors, we do see some of these indicators suggesting that MP is probably more effective than LP conditions. Okay, let's get to some of the qualitative data. We interviewed the kids, right? FGD, you got them in. And what did they say in terms of learning? They say, hey, look, I do enjoy looking at the analogies that the teacher shared with us. The linear one say, oh, the Stanley Matthews move. Stanley Matthews is a famous Liverpool player, right? His favorite move is dropping the shoulder and pushing the ball to the other side. Okay? So we could see that LP kids could remember what was taught, and they try to just replicate the movement form too. Okay? So you could see that for the NP, they could try to find ways to create their own learning. For the LP, they just try to follow a prescribed movement form. Which is also okay, because it does tell us that whatever conditions they were giving them, they were actually using it and trying to remember how to use it. Enjoyment, to enjoy playing during PE time, just maybe it gives me quite a long time to practice. For the linear one, they also do enjoy. So what it does say is that, hey, actually for the kids, just getting out there, doing sports, doing PE is something that they already enjoy, regardless of whether it's non-linear or linear pedagogy conditions. Variations, yes, even for the non-linear pedagogy, although we have a lot of variation, they also want more variety there. The linear one is very repetitive, it's boring because I'm just trying to perfect that movement that is expected of me. We interviewed the teachers too. More time required to explore, yes, they recognize that it does take a bit more time, but they also feel that the students are actively engaged in trying to solve the problem. Linear one, hey, look, I just tell you what to do, you follow, you repeat, it's fast and quick, but it doesn't give a lot of room for exploration. The teachers also felt, hey, I'm giving analogies here, I don't restrict the creativity. For the linear one, says, hey, look, they just have to follow exactly what was taught. Yeah, it's probably easier for them to deliver, but again, little room for exploration. Active learning, more authentic experience for the non-linear pedagogy one. Linear one, the teacher says, hey, maybe not enough, perhaps challenge for cognitive thinking. Fun and enjoyment, yes, both actually felt that it was just as positive. As I mentioned earlier on, getting out there is good enough for them. But some teachers also did share, hey, maybe a bit of a hybrid of linear and non-linear could also work. Yes, we also agree. Maybe at a certain point in time, there could be a bit more movement form orientation, and some point in time, maybe a little bit more movement outcome orientation. So that's something that perhaps in the next study, we could look at a hybrid of linear and non-linear and see actually how it works too. Right? So what does it mean for us? Some practical applications, as we know, make sure that it's athlete-centered, focus on the individual, coaches as facilitators of learning. Exploration is key, allow them to explore. Right? The keywords that I would share really is allow them to search, discover, and exploit the possibilities. We know coordination emerges due to those different interaction of constraints, the performer, the environment, and the task. Lots of implications here in terms of transfer of learning. Okay, which or how would you actually encourage transfer of learning? Implications for talent development. Do we focus on early specialization, That means they start the game right very young, or do we really focus more on perhaps early diversification where they play many different games, they acquire many different movement solutions which could be transferable for many different sports eventually, or to the sports they want to specialize eventually as well. Yeah, so these are some of the resources that you can go to. You want to know a little bit more about nonlinear pedagogy, but I'm more than happy to speak to you, and I'm sure Azza and myself will be here to address some of your questions as well. And it's not just my work, a team of international collaborators and local collaborators as well. And so we work together to work in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chow. And of course, right about now, ladies and gentlemen, it is also my pleasure to invite Mr. Azza to join us on stage to facilitate this segment. And yes, of course, ladies and gentlemen, you can also head on into the Mentimeter website. All right, and of course, post your question away in the Mentimeter platform. So on that note, I will hand the time over to Mr. Azza and Dr. Chow.
Jiayi, thanks again for that sharing. Very interesting, although I've heard some of those things before, but it's always good to reflect on our own practices and see how much we have applied some of those principles in our coaching. So with that, if you have any questions, just come up to the mics on the aisles and you can ask them. Chris.
Yeah, Chris Nunn from Oceania Paralympic Committee, formerly of the Australian Institute of Sport. My question is this: in being a very close fan of many team sports, I love what's being presented for development of junior athletes. But when we hear successful coaches talk about premierships and elite performance, they talk about structure and plan, team plays and strategy. At what stage do you think it's important to transfer from this just play approach to integration of teamwork and strategy which will enable elite performance success?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for your question. Very relevant question. So it's true, when we play as a team, there must be some form of structure to it. But how they actually enact those movements in a game setting would probably need some form of spontaneity, some form of adjustments and adaptation on the ground itself. So, for example, if you know that, okay, look, if we are down by a goal and we need to equalize in a game, 10 minutes, what do? We push players up. That's the structure that we know we're going to play. Instead of playing a 4-4-2, we're going to push maybe another extra striker or 2 strikers up. So there is a structure in terms of how you want to play, but the actual enactment of it would probably be we need to be a bit more adaptable and flexible as well. Because if your team is playing in such a structured but yet predictable way, it's quite easy for your opponents to anticipate what you're going to do. And it becomes very, as I said, predictable, where there is lack of a perturbation, okay, a lack of adjustments to how the two teams are playing to allow one team to gain an advantage, because everything is kind of in a balance. Because when you do this, we know what we do. We're going to counter it with this. We're going to play on this side. We know what we're going to do. We're going to counter it with this. Because your structure is very predictable for a defending team that I'm playing against you. Whereas if there is a bit more spontaneity in terms of variability in how you do it, you could then perhaps gain an advantage over that team that you're playing against. So that's where you need some form of structure to know, okay, if we are down by a goal, if there's certain things happening in a game context, we know what we need to do, but the actual enactment of it, perhaps there could be some form of that variability in there, which would make it less predictable for your opponent to counter. So for example, for the longest time, and you could add as well because there's a game of rugby, the England team played a very structured, predictable game. But by and by, slowly, there are people who are taking some of these ideas in terms of the variability in practice. You need to perturb the system, and they added a lot of these kind of ideas in the variability in practice, making their practices a lot more representative. Where now, these days, the England rugby team is using some of these ideas to add some of these perturbations in the game to make it less structured. So, if you look at the All Blacks as well, they have a lot of players who are very flamboyant, and they do things that could not be so predictable in the actual game itself, which makes it very difficult for their opponents to counter. And that unpredictability allows a team like the All Blacks to gain an advantage over their opponents by doing things that is not so structured. But yet, as a team, surely there is some structure in terms of the formation that you play, where you should go. But sometimes the actual enactment, you could see the passes that they make, the moves that they do. Sometimes it's really on the spot, on the ground, moment by moment adaptation that creates the advantage for the attacking team. Yeah.
Thanks, Jiayi, for the answer. Any other questions? Yes. And if you are too shy to come out and ask questions, if you go to Mentimeter, you can type the code 128884 to post your questions. Yes?
You actually co-authored this book in 2015 with 3 other authors. One is from US, UK, and New Zealand. May I know how intensive has this nonlinear pedagogy been implemented in Singapore at that time? Because my understanding, right, linear pedagogy is more systematic and it's more Singaporean kind of education style. Nonlinear is very dynamic and it's UK, US, and yeah. And my second question, you mentioned about hybrid, which is 2015 to now is already 3 years. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So it was actually published in 2016. It's well received, but it's not easy to understand how you could infuse it. Again, I would not say that this is rocket science, because coaches, practitioners may be already using some of these ideas in terms of manipulating constraints. But the key thing is we would like to highlight is that you need to understand why you make those changes. Why do you manipulate certain constraints? Why do you need to have representative learning design? Why perhaps do you use analogies? I think the understanding is really quite critical, because then you can actually use it for different settings and different phases or different training objectives within the same sport. Okay? Many of my collaborators are doing the good work over in New Zealand, Australia, in Europe as well, and not limited to those areas as well. Collaborators in France, Portugal, in the UK, the hockey team is taking on board this very seriously as well. Locally, a lot of sharing has been done with the ministry at the school level, where we have community of practice with PE teachers in the school, and the word is getting out there in terms of how you could use some of these design principles in enacting some of your classes. So I've been doing sharing with the ministry from Academy of Singapore Teachers, and they have been going out and doing workshops for teachers as well. I've also done some workshops with NYSY in this area of work too. So it's catching on, but you're right. For a person or a practitioner to actually be using some of these ideas in nonlinear pedagogy, it's important for the practitioners to know your sports very well. Right? You need to know what kind of constraints to manipulate. You need to know what kind of rules to manipulate. If you're not comfortable with that, it becomes very difficult to actually change those rules and change the task goals in a meaningful way. Because you could change different things at any moment, at any time, right? But then what would be your objective? Would they be leading, or would you be leading them to search and explore certain movement solutions that is relevant to what you're trying to do for that session? Or they could just go off tangent and do something else totally different, and maybe acquire some movement solution that is less relevant to what you intend for the person to do. So those are the challenges there. So you need to know your sports very well. So the hybrid question is a good one, because at the moment we have a current project looking at a hybrid. So looking at how we could use perhaps some elements of linear pedagogy in conjunction with nonlinear pedagogy. Is there an effect if we do linear first then nonlinear, or nonlinear first then linear? How would that impact? Is there a sequencing to it? So these are questions that we will ask, and hopefully we find some answers in the near future. So it's been a while, but it's been catching on. So you can, if you just do a Google and you do nonlinear pedagogy or you do constraint-set approach, you'll see quite a lot of people, especially in the UK, in Europe, and in Australia especially, using some of these ideas in their work.
Thanks, Jiayi, for that. If I may add my own experiences, when I first read up about nonlinear pedagogy, was the fact that actually, if you look at your own practices, you would have really implemented. My guess is most of you, if not all, would have really implemented some form of nonlinear pedagogy. It's just that maybe you never knew it was such. So I think now it's with the theories, with the models that Jiayi has shared, it's really about us trying to find out and really reflecting on our own current practices and see what else can be done to vary your practices, to put in constraints such that also that it leads to a better outcome and more successful performance there for players. So those are my quick thoughts.
Yeah, you don't have to use all the design principles in all your sessions, right? So there are some ideas that you could use at some point in time as well, at different occasions and different purposes.
And I think the triangle that talks about the performer, the environment, and the task. I think the environment and the task are things that within the control of the coach, and that's what we will have to think about in terms of manipulating in order to get a better outcome for students. Yeah, all players. All right. I know we stand between you and lunch, so if you have more questions, I'm sure Jiayi will be hanging around for quite a bit, and you can ask him directly. And with that, I think we can have them go for lunch.
In fact, actually, sir, I have some pressing announcement to make before.
Okay. So before Derek makes an announcement, can I put hands together again for Dr. Chow?
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to all of you. We are more happy to answer any questions. Thank you.